Good point, John. Clarifying this is very important because people tend to intermingle the OT versus IoT and then don't realize the IT impacts. But OT, in the most general sense, is a technology that is controlling some piece of equipment. It could be something in a factory, something in a utility, it could be a power plant, but that OT system has a critical function in a lot of companies that needs to be protected. Those things also may have been running for years or decades and controlling that. And in some cases, they're segmented off. You can't get there from here. Data can only come out of those environments in some areas, but those environments are what the business relies on to keep going. When you go to IoT, Internet of Things, that's some of the more modern control things that are touching the internet. It could be TVs or other network devices that are brought in that communicate more broadly than an OT system that should be very segmented and shouldn't really talk to the internet. The IoT talks a lot more broadly, and they're also hard to manage because the way they operate, they often are not a trusted system on your network, on your general network. And then IT, many people are very familiar with. It's the infrastructure that we all work with on a daily basis to enable our technical actions and operations. The challenges, as you can imagine, with the OT, which is really the again another elephant in the room, because those systems are designed where you can't get to them intentionally. That makes it harder to update those. Also, some of those, the control system vendors that produce the technology they're riding on, you can't do updates on those except for certain outages. Also, if everyone wasn't aware, plants come up, plants come down intentionally. They're brought down. When they're brought down, that's when the updates are happening. We really don't do updates to systems that are controlling the grid, for example, while the plant's operating or while the grid is operating. So those types of designs, while are critical and protected carefully, also make it more difficult to produce updates for those systems. And they're also not often a Windows system. If they're network connected, they're probably not. They may not be a Windows system where you can just push a patch to it, and you can't broadly push technology to these systems.
No, great point, Stephen. Appreciate the sort of description of that. Dennis or Steve, any other thoughts there on that topic?
Well, I think that Steve hit a really key point there that maybe not everybody always gathers is, and even going back to this CrowdStrike situation, right, where they were able to push updates to almost all of their customers because of the way they were baked into the kernel. And that's up to date. And there's a lot of other tools, right? A lot of other cybersecurity tools, especially anything having with antivirus or even phishing mails and any other type of aspects like that get updated every 15 minutes automatically into your systems. That's not going to be the concern, right? With in the OT environment, especially putting security tools in there, because that's just not going to be allowed, at least not with their current operational rhythm of shutting down to do any type of updates. So that will be fairly interesting when we look at the trends and the types of going back to the types of tools that we're putting into from a security perspective. So that'll be one of those things that, especially a lot of the vendors, I know some of the startups and others that I'm supporting and advising is even they have some great ideas and some great technology that they'd like to, bring to protect critical infrastructure. But there's some of these subtleties that they just don't understand. I think the other thing too is what, and it happened at one of my last companies that I actually worked at where I was the CISO is the one thing also, even though it's a little bit laborious, but very critical is the OT environment follows something called the Operational Excellence Framework in most of the large investor-owned utilities. Each one of those is slightly tweaked a little bit, but it's a public information out there. At Duke Energy, their Operational Excellence Framework has like 4 major attributes and then 14 elements within those 4 attributes. And some of the things that they've almost demanded that we even do on when I was there, demanded that we do on the IT security side of the house and implement was actually pick some of the ones that were relevant to make sure that when we were doing things in cybersecurity and even IT with some of their updates and things they were deploying, took that same kind of disciplined approach to doing updates and doing changes in their OT environment. Two of the key things that they looked at is they have one of the four main attributes is continuous improvement. Yeah. And so they have great elements within that. They have 4 or 5 elements within that to make sure that you're looking at that. I'm sure that, CrowdStrike and others are going through that now. Everything from observation programs, you have a corrective action program, you do benchmarking, and definitely lessons learned. I mean, they hold us accountable for those types of things. But one of the things I'll admit that wasn't, in all the years that I was doing this, that until I came over to, into the energy sector, was actually the way that they focused on human performance and human performance tools. And that falls underneath, that's an element within one of their attributes. And that's everything from doing things like, pre-job briefs, peer checking the work, doing self-checks, and all this stuff is documented, right? Doing your verification, making sure you have good, clear communications between team members and even third parties when you're doing the work. And then even a questioning attitude, right? To make sure that if something doesn't seem right, that you can bring up those questioning attitudes. And there's a whole list of all of the tools that you could use and all the ways that they all fit into making sure that something like what happened with CrowdStrike and other things that we've seen in the past don't happen in their environment and could potentially shut down operations. And so I think companies that maybe haven't really brought that over and demanding that of the cyber teams and even some of the IT operations folks, if there are 2 different organizations, I think it'd be behoove them to go back and either look at that operational framework, operational excellence, and especially go back and look at the human performance tools and see if there's things there that you can implement to provide, better updates, better patches, better deployments into the OT environment. Over.
Dennis, that's great. And I love